Welcome to Crear, Résister, Transform, a festival for feminist movements. We invite you to join us in creating a space that invites and challenges us all to operate from a place of courage, curiosity, and bravery. We have live language interpretation available in this session. Look to the bottom right-hand side of your screen. You will see an icon of a globe, which reads, if you're reading an English interpretation, click on it and select the language you would like to receive interpretation in. So if you'd like interpretation in English, click on English. We also have closed captioning available in this session. Look on the bottom right-hand side of your screen and you'll see an icon which in English reads Live Transcript. Click on it and you will have the option to show subtitles or to view the full transcript. You can also change the size of the text. To do this, click on Subtitle Settings and change to large. If you would like to change your name, click on the Participants button at the top of the Zoom window. Hover your mouse over your name in the participants list on the right-hand side and click on Rename. Enter the name you'd like to appear in the Zoom meeting and click on OK. We invite you to join the global AWID membership family. And to do this, visit our website, www.awid.org, and click to learn more about why you should become an AWID member. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
Bonjour et bienvenue à Crear, Résister, Transform, un festival pour les mouvements féministes. C'est avec joie que nous vous accueillons à cet événement et vous encourageons à nous rejoindre dans les activités du festival qui auront lieu tout au long du mois de septembre. Nous vous invitons à nous rejoindre et à créer un espace qui nous invite à faire preuve de courage, de curiosité et de bravoure. Dans cette activité, nous avons une interprétation simultanée disponible en plusieurs langues. Dans la barre de menu en bas de l'écran, cliquez sur Interprétation. Cliquez ensuite sur la langue que vous souhaitez entendre. Pour n'entendre que la langue interprétée, vous pouvez cliquer sur Muter l'audio original. Nous avons également des sous-titres disponibles en anglais. Dans la barre de menu en bas de l'écran, cliquez sur Transcription en direct. Cliquez ensuite sur Montrer sous-titres. Pour lire la transcription complète, vous pouvez cliquer sur Voir la transcription complète. Et pour changer la taille du texte, cliquez sur Paramètres de sous-titres et choisissez Large. Pour changer votre nom après être entré dans une réunion Zoom, cliquez sur le bouton Participant en bas de la fenêtre Zoom. Ensuite, faites passer votre souris sur votre nom dans la liste de participants à droite de la fenêtre Zoom, puis cliquez sur Renommer. Tapez le nom que vous voulez voir apparaître dans la réunion Zoom et cliquez sur OK. Encore merci de votre participation. Nous vous encourageons à partager vos réactions et vos commentaires sur les réseaux sociaux en utilisant le hashtag Feminist Festival et taguer l'AWID si vous pouvez. Nous vous invitons aussi à rejoindre la famille mondiale des membres de l'AWID. Pour ce faire, vous pouvez visiter notre site web à l'adresse www.awid.org et cliquer sur « En savoir plus sur pourquoi devenir membre de l'AWID ». Merci et profitez du festival.
Bienvenidos al festival Crear, Résister, Transform. AWID está comprometida con la creación de un espacio virtual que nos invita y desafía a todos a funcionar desde un lugar de curiosidad, generosidad y responsabilidad compartida. Les invitamos a crear conjuntamente con nosotros espacios libres de acoso y violencia. Por favor, descarguen y revisen los principios de participación para el festival en awid.org/festival 2021. Tenemos disponible interpretación a distintos idiomas en vivo. Esto varía según cada sesión. Para activarla, en su menú de control, seleccionen el icono de Interpretation, elijan el idioma que quieren escuchar. Para escuchar solamente el idioma interpretado, seleccionen Mute Original Audio, silenciar el audio original de forma que solamente escuchen la interpretación en el idioma español si este es el que desean. También contamos con subtitulado disponible, en inglés únicamente, pero si lo desean activar, en los controles para la reunión hagan clic en subtitulado en vivo, Live Transcript. Después hagan clic en Show Subtitle, en mostrar subtítulos. Para ver el subtitulado completo, hagan clic en View Full Transcript, ver subtitulado completo. Para cambiar el tamaño del texto, hagan clic sobre Subtitle Settings, ajustes de subtítulos, y cámbienlo a grande, large. Si desean cambiar cómo aparece su nombre en Zoom, pueden hacerlo también. Para cambiar su nombre, después de entrar a una reunión de Zoom, hagan clic en el botón Participantes, en la parte de arriba de la ventana de Zoom. Después, deslicen el ratón sobre su nombre en la lista de participantes, que está a la derecha de la ventana de Zoom, y hagan clic sobre Renombrar. Escriban el nombre con el que quieren aparecer en la reunión de Zoom y hagan clic sobre OK. Lo más importante, únanse a EWID. Al unirse a EWID se suman un proceso organizativo feminista mundial, un poder colectivo surgido del trabajo entre movimientos y basado en la solidaridad. Ingresen a nuestro sitio web ewid.org, membresía, para escuchar las razones por las cuales deberían ser parte de la membresía de EWID, o escríbanos a membership@awid.org. Gracias y continúen disfrutando el festival Crear, Resistir, Transforma.
Las ancestras hacen un círculo sagrado, poderoso. Estamos en medio de él, sintiendo su cuerpo. Suena el tambor de la tierra. Nuestra piel se tiñe de colores: verdes, rojas, naranjas, azul, violetas, negras. Suena el tambor de la tierra. La voz vive, el grito ocupa, el canto se presenta, arrulla el sueño, despierta conciencia. Suena el tambor de la tierra y la mirada es cómplice, profunda. Suena el tambor de la tierra, el corazón es uno solo, percute el alma, nos invita a mover, vuelve el deseo, nos indica un camino, el del poder popular, el del autogobierno, el de la revolución de las mujeres, el del Estado. Suena el tambor de la tierra y yo les invito a entrar, a hacer voz, mirada, semilla, fuego, acción, comunión. Suena el tambor de la tierra y yo les invito a descubrir, a amarla, a conocerla, a defenderla desde el corazón de la Comuna. Hace 25 años que habitan las mismas calles polvorientas, en lo más alto de una loma con nombre de león. Vienen de diferentes lugares, muchas con tradición campesina. Tienen la piel color rebeldía, color cardón, porque en ellas habita el semiárido larense. De allí, su amor por la vida, su aprecio, el cuidado y resguardo por el agua y el territorio. Es que son herederas de la estirpe Gallón, Ayamán, comunidades indígenas que habitaron y habitan el norte del estado Lara. Desde muy jóvenes aprendieron que la maternidad es un signo del que no se escapa con facilidad. Cuidar a los hijos, la casa, el marido, lavar, planchar, cocinar, fregar. Ay, todo tenía que estar impecable, insisten. Y la vida era eso y la violencia, el insulto, el maltrato, el golpe, el reclamo, la queja. Era algo de esperar, algo que parecía natural. Así se vivían los días, la cotidianidad, en aquellas calles de tierra, viviendo en pequeñas casitas de chapa, de zinc, sin servicios básicos. Esa era la pobreza, la precariedad cuando llegó un hombre. Sí, un hombre. Un proyecto, una revolución inusual porque se hizo sin la guerra. Entonces las invitaron a salir. Las invitaron a tomar la calle, el espacio público. Y ellas en ese proceso derribaron puertas y ventanas, rompieron cadenas, se soltaron el cabello, se sintieron libres. Libres cimarronas, rebeldes caribes, guerreras libertadoras. Y es que eso de independencia y soberanía es algo que las que pudieron estudiar lo habían leído, pero sentirse protagonistas de un proceso de cambio, de transformación social, eso es una importante conquista que tenemos que mencionar, que no podemos olvidar. En lo alto de esa loma se siente la complicidad, el fuego compartido, los años de lucha. Cuentan que una de ellas se iba con su paraguas por las tardes y de casa en casa, tomando un cafecito, conversando con la gente, iba convocando, convenciendo. Vamos a hacer el consejo comunal, avancemos hacia las comunas, hagamos planes de trabajo para la educación, el deporte, la salud, la alimentación, el comité de mujer, igualdad de género, la economía. Vamos a hacer gobierno popular para que el barrio se ponga bonito. Y así llegaron las casas, el consultorio popular, el Simoncito, el proyecto de electrificación, el de agua potable. Son algunos de los logros comunales, de los sueños comunales hechos realidad. Y ustedes se preguntarán, ¿cómo llegó una cuentera, una cuentacuentos a esa loma con nombre de león? Y yo les digo, es que nací bochinchera, dando pelea. Nací callejera, diría mi abuela, disposicionera, agregaría el comandante Chávez. Y de tanto andar, renegar, pelear y dudar de aquel militar, me terminó convenciendo con el proyecto comunal. Con eso de ser autogobierno, de que el pueblo administre sus recursos, con eso de todo el poder para las comunas. Con eso me convenció. Pero yo sabía que algo faltaba. Porque las mujeres comuneras, seguimos construyendo poder popular y nuestro corazón se viste de lucha antiimperialista y anticapitalista. Pero hay algo que nos duele, que nos sigue afectando. Hay heridas del patriarcado que están presentes. Entonces un día me descubro llorando y sonó el tambor de la tierra y las ancestras hablaron. Me vi rodeada de un grupo de mujeres que me sostuvo, me contuvo mientras me derramaba frente a ellas, mientras dolía y me liberaba al mismo tiempo. Así, descubrí que el amor entre mujeres te sana, te salva, que nuestra amistad es profundamente política y que la sororidad es una manera de andar, de vivir la vida. A partir de ese momento, no me volví a sentir sola, no me sentí más nunca una isla, porque sé que hay un grupo de mujeres que me lleva, me traen, me aman, me cuidan y viceversa. Sé que esta forma de hacerme feminista, con la mística de Mujeres por la Vida, es una experiencia de sentirse conectada, amada por mujeres, aunque no las vuelvas a ver. Entonces, ¿cómo no querer que esto que me ocurrió le pase a otras? Este amanecer, este parirme un nuevo corazón, es un regalo de las diosas que tiene que ser compartido. Por eso decidí unirme a ellas y a echar a andar por las comunas. Comencé a caminar, a conocer otras experiencias. Comenzamos a debatir sobre salud, sobre educación, sobre alimentación. Nos fuimos predicando el verbo antipatriarcal y las comunas libres de machismos. Insistimos en recuperar la sabiduría ancestral, la intuición. Decidimos defender la vida hablando de aborto. Y nos vemos riendo, llorando, debatiendo, reflexionando, y me encuentro con Macu, con la China, con Jenny, con María, con Carolina, con Ramona, con Irma y hasta con nuestra hermana Jennifer, que se nos fue hace poco. Este es mi homenaje a ellas, a las mujeres loma, a las mujeres leona. Ellas, sin duda, se sembraron en mí con tanta fuerza que son Dios. Ellas, sin duda, marcan un camino. Ellas son las que hacen posible el cuidado familiar, el cuidado colectivo. Ellas son también una fuerza en el territorio para superar el bloqueo, la violencia patriarcal, la traición política, para superar la burocracia, la corrupción. Ellas sin duda marcan un camino. Ellas sin duda son una brújula. Ellas sin duda son el corazón de la comuna. Muchísimas gracias. Soy María Bonita, Marija Morales desde Venezuela, y espero que puedan seguir disfrutando de este hermoso festival que nos junta como mujeres, como diversidad, que nos junta desde el corazón de la comuna para crear, resistir y transformar. Gracias.
Good afternoon, everybody from Nairobi, Kenya. My name is Fellow Jane Anumo, and I work at AWID, the Association for Women's Rights in Development, as the lead for the Feminist Economic Recovery Plans at the Building Feminist Economies Initiative. This plenary, Alternatives, Feminisms, and Another World, is part of the Feminist Festival, Crear, Transform, and Resist, that will be running throughout this month of September. Please visit our website, www.awid.org, feministas.org for the full program details. In her essay, Confronting Empire, in 2003, author Arundhati Roy said, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. The last few years have been liminal, a turning point, the reckoning with the systems we live under, and the people's movement to build alternatives. The COVID pandemic has shown that a different world is not only possible, but it is urgent. Something feminists have been saying for a long time is alternatives are here, they exist, and here they are. Today, we are joined by a fantastic and renowned group of leading thinkers, activists, movement shapers, and builders who are daring to invent the future. In today's panel, we want to learn about alternatives to the state and feminist take on governance and transformative justice, on feminist economies that center people and climate justice, and on gender diverse cultures and lived realities. Join me in welcoming my speakers. First speaker will be Dilar Dirik. Dilar holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Cambridge. She's currently a postdoctoral researcher and course convener at the University of Oxford and an author of the forthcoming book, The Kurdish Women's Movement, History, Theory, and Practice. My second panelist is Nana Akosua Hanson. Nana is the creator of the thrilling and philosophical Ghanaian graphic novel series, Moon Girls, which follows the adventures of African queer superheroes fighting for an Africa free from corruption, patriarchy, and the legacies of slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism. She's the founder of Drama Queens, a grassroots youth activist organization, and is a radio host at Y 107.9 FM in Accra, Ghana. My third panelist needs little to no introduction, and this is Dr. Vandana Shiva. Dr. Shiva is trained as a physicist and is a leading researcher whose work addresses the most significant ecological and social issues of our time. In 1991, she founded Navdanya, a national movement to protect the diversity and integrity of living resources, especially native seed, the promotion of organic farming and fair trade. And Dr. Shiva is also a courageous activist and a powerful communicator, acknowledged by many awards, including the Alternative Nobel Prize. Thank you so much for making the time, and we really look forward to a rejuvenating conversation that is very much needed in this time. My first question I will raise to you, Dilar. The Kurdish women's movement has been an inspiration in creating alternatives in the deepest sense, alternative ways of thinking and understanding the world, of organizing society, of building movements, and all of this within a context of severe state violence and repression. What are some of the dominant logics being challenged, and what would you say are some of the key elements needed to make this alternative possible?
Thank you very much, Felojin, for the introduction, and it's really an honor to be in such great company, and thank you so much for bringing us all together. I really look forward to hearing the other speakers. I will jump straight in. So the Kurdish Women's Liberation Movement is a very broad social movement, and it involves a variety of, it's an ecology of a movement actually, and it involves self-organizing assemblies in the diaspora. There are grassroots campaigning and participation in parliamentary and municipal politics inside Turkey. There's also a large-scale self-governance project in what is known as the Rojava Revolution in northern Syria, which is what the women's movement there also calls a women's revolution. And there are also self-defending militant units across Kurdistan. So these are all different sites that operate under different conditions and circumstances, but they're all linked in a confederal manner as part of a larger anti-colonial revolutionary movement. So there's a lot that can be said, but I will focus on one thing that I think is of relevance to other women's movements or feminist struggles and other ecological and radical democratic struggles around the world that the movement would like to discuss actually with other people. So women's liberation, radical democracy, and ecology are the three principles that inform the movement's paradigm. And as an outcome of this 4 decades old struggle, in the last couple of years, the movement has been trying to introduce its concept of a world women's democratic confederal system as an alternative feminist form of internationalism for the 21st century that also reassesses the current conditions that we live in today, which is a system of capitalist modernity that is built on the systematic killing of life, built on a legacy of colonization, of imperialism, and all forms of systematic violence, including patriarchal violence, of course. So this is a proposal that the movement has been discussing locally, as well as regionally and globally with activists and with other movements. And what it represents is basically a grassroots democracy for the women's struggle. So we can see this already emerge in the Kurdish context. Each part of Kurdistan, Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Iran, has its own women's movement, which is organized usually in the form of a congress. It's not the same everywhere. The conditions are different. But usually there are local assemblies with rotating spokespeople, committees working on specific issues, and alliance building efforts that connect to local struggles and grow in this sense. So there are these different women's movements that come also together under a Kurdistan-wide umbrella, and strategic perspectives are developed in this collective manner. And similarly in the diaspora, in countries like Germany, where there is a huge Kurdish population that ended up there as an outcome of war and displacement, and we have all kinds of local women's assemblies there as well, in places like Germany, for example, in Berlin, in Hamburg, in Frankfurt. These also organize according to the specific needs of these communities, but they also coordinate nationally and across Europe. And then there's the Europe-wide women's movement that also coordinates with international movements and so on. So what I'm trying to explain is that our movement is organized in a confederal manner. We don't have one center. We have central decisions that are taken for strategic perspective and that are resulting in different forms of action. But this is a grassroots democratic process where the will of the local communities is taken as the most fundamental unit of our democratic system. And we're trying to see how this can also be maybe applied or at least discussed or exchanged with other similar feminist movements in different parts of the world to build common resistant fronts in regional, in local, and in global context. So, for example, the struggle against femicide would be a good one, or war, resistance against war. What this represents is, as I said, a perspective for a 21st century feminist internationalism that is not statist and not male-dominated in nature. So in this sense, we can say that the movement's perspective is not just concerned with the decolonization of Kurdistan against all kinds of violence, but also it seeks frameworks to decolonize life from systems of power, such as capitalism. And all of this links to the idea of autonomy, because in our eyes, protest and resistance are not enough. We also need to organize autonomously in all spheres of life, including in our movements. So rather than becoming secondary wings in larger struggles, we need to become, as women in our movement, for example, the radicalizing force that pulls the rest of the movement with us. So the women's movement in Kurdistan has its own theory works, its own media, its own alliance building strategies, its own action plans, and the most open expression of this is the system that has been built by women inside Rojava. And of course, this autonomy-led self-determination idea also impacts our strategies of how we see femicide as not simply being a reflection of something that men do to women, but that this is part of a larger system of a patriarchal mentality that is connected to different ideologies of domination. And to abolish femicide, really, we need to transform our societies. We cannot expect change to come from outside, that we cannot expect anyone else to liberate us. So of course this requires belief, sacrifice, and patience, but we truly believe that we can abolish these systems if we organize ourselves autonomously, but we also need to consciously create new conditions for our struggles. And I want to say, however, that all of this happens in the context, because I don't have that much time, but I do want to stress that all of this is, it sounds great, and we have all these ideas that we're trying to discuss with other women, but this is happening in the context of an existential war conditions. So inside Turkey, for example, the Kurdish women's movement is one of the strongest dynamics of opposition against the authoritarian, neoliberal, nationalist, and increasingly more militarist and Islamist rule of the Turkish state. Now there are thousands of Kurdish women and other women who are women's rights defenders who are in prison, among them elected mayors and MPs. There are These are people who have been advocating for a return to the peace process. However, many of them are incarcerated. Kurdish people are systematically killed. The Turkish state is using drones specifically to target even refugee camps outside of the Turkish state borders. And in the recent years, of course, there have been large-scale military operations of the Turkish state in Iraq and in Syria. So what we call the women's revolution in Rojava, where women have been writing the laws, they have built their own self-defense systems, where they have been trying to really revolutionize the idea of revolution by dissociating it from these male-dominated ideas. This is all now under systematic attack, which is why we speak of a genocidal as well as feminicidal war. So I know I'm running out of time, but I just want to say that notions of self-defense and leadership are very important when we try to think of alternatives, of feminist alternatives, because we don't need to replicate these male-dominated, repressive, neoliberal ideas of leadership. And we can also think about defending ourselves as defending other struggles that are happening in other parts of the world. So in our perspective, from our perspective, alternative means to organize yourself on your own terms, but also to make sure that you connect your struggle to struggles that are happening in other parts of the world. And I think sustainability and ecological mindset in our feminist organizing is very important, because another threat that we face is, I think, an onslaught by liberal feminist ideologies that undermine the struggles of women in the global south and elsewhere. So I think I'll stop here, but I look forward to hearing the other speakers. Thank you so much.
Dila, thank you so much for those powerful remarks and, just grounding us in such a powerful opening. We have a lot of honor and respect for the Kurdish women's resistance, and we honor you for the work that you're doing as part of the resistance in documenting the struggles, and we really look forward to what you'll be able to share in your forthcoming book. I think for me, the key elements that really ground me and we live, from this conversation with me in a long time. And one is the 3 principles that drive the resistance as women's liberation, radical democracy, and ecology being the driving factors. I think 100% we need to decolonize life from all systems of power. And you really talk about that really beautifully when you're talking about protest and resistance not being enough, but we also need to organize autonomously in all spheres of our life, including our movements. And in that, just really reasserting the power of feminist movements by saying that we need to become the radicalizing force that pulls the rest of the movement with us, and not just secondary wings in larger movement struggles. I think you tie it up so beautifully when you talk about the need to have our struggles connected with other struggles happening around the world. And I think the danger of cooptation, because even as we're talking about alternatives and feminist alternatives, as it were, we know that there's a danger of cooptation, and that's the cycle of capitalism and patriarchy and neocolonialism. And so how can liberal feminist ideologies, as part of our struggle, not be undermining the struggles of the women in the global south and elsewhere? So powerful remarks, Dila, amazing. And we'll come back to you again, thankfully, in the next round of questions. And so now I will move on to Nana Akosua Hanson. So Nana, earlier this year, we saw an onslaught of religious, media, and state violence targeting queer and transgender people in Ghana. Please tell us about the power of art in challenging dominant logics and creating alternative representations, cultures, and ways of seeing and being in the world. Can you give us some examples from your own art and activism? Welcome, Nana.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity of this panel, first of all, and greetings to all of you, including my panelists. I'll say for me, the power of art is its unique ability to transport the human mind to places that we'd previously swear that we can never go, for instance, right? Stories that we'd be emphatic that we could never understand. Art has the ability to send us there. Art is that rare avenue by which human beings can be put in this realm of empathy, because art actually does play in the realm of human emotion. And frankly, to me, what I think is the mystery consciousness of humanity. It can't be defined. I can't tell you what art is or isn't, but its value often lies in providing us perspective and giving us new ways to envision our world. Its effect is often subtle, sometimes hard to measure. It can be confusing, and often contradictory messages can be layered into art. However, good art is always one that contains a surplus of meaning, things that we can't quite describe or put a finger on, but it still moves us, you know? It stimulates us and alters our perception. So in a dystopic world of rising religious and conservative fundamentalism, in a world of violence, homophobia, in Ghana, as you've mentioned, I mean, art has allowed us to create an alternative reality. And this may sound crazy. It's not just creating an alternative reality, but actually living this alternative reality, this alternate reality that we've created. Sexual minorities are generally perceived as perverse and demonized in our Ghanaian society due to obviously patriarchy and religious fundamentalism. Which has been rising and has peaked, especially in the year 2021. However, all of this is based on this fallacy of thinking that African sexual minorities did not exist in pre-colonial Africa, and that this sexuality was somehow an importation from the West. But however, when it comes to arts and culture, LGBT stories are consistently in this light as perverse and generally dehumanizing. So for me, I just try to challenge this in my art, you know. I try to challenge this and I say it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Well, I will create an alternate reality in my art that shows you the wondrous abilities of Eve and Lilith, for instance, you know. In art, you can still that oppressors want to control. You can create that alternate reality. So using examples in my own work, Moon Girls is a graphic novel series which follows the adventures of queer African moon girls fighting for an Africa that's free from patriarchy, corruption, homophobia, religious fundamentalism. And I came to this work realizing that there was few to none, no stories of graphic novels or comics that tell the stories of queer African women, that center queer African women in this canon, in graphic novels and comics. So in planning out what my next artivist project would be, it was very imperative for me that the Moon Girls be queer girls in West Africa, you know, and placing them in the superhero canon, which is often dominated by Superman or Spider-Man or Batman. Placing this in this canon actually is the power that art provides to queer the hegemonic narrative. You know, the medium of a digital graphic novel has also provided, great ways to merge illustration, color, poetry, philosophy, to tell these stories and create an alternative space for rewriting queer African women in history, herstory, artstory, you know, as well as documenting powerful African youth movements. So for instance, in season 2 of Moon Girls, we actually cover the powerful NSARS movement run by African Nigerian youth in Nigeria in one of our chapters, and it's what we try to do. And at Drama Queens, we've tried to use theater to teach against rape culture and homophobia by telling community stories, staging them, allowing people to walk in new dimensions, you know, live someone else's story, walk a short mile, at least a very short mile in someone else's shoes in this short space of time. We manipulate light and sound and the skills of very good actors to tell these stories. And sometimes I would have members of the audience come up to share how healing it was for them to be able to see their own stories, you know, enacted in this form of collective healing. Even not just on the audience front, there are times where the transformation happens from behind the stage. So for instance, one of the actors that we had for a play that was on queer Ghanaian stories had obviously, you know, been raised in a very homophobic environment. So had these wrong notions and stereotypes of who Ghanaian queer and trans people are. And by allowing himself to take on the role and walking the story of this person, act the role as an actor in the play, by the time we were done, there was huge transformation. He came up to me afterwards and said all the notions he used to have, by the end of the play, he dropped them. He's cleansed of that hatred and violence that he inherited, you know? And so for me, I do believe that in the work of bringing change, in bringing transformation to our communities, in creating a world that is free from oppression, art does not replace all the other forms, such as policy change and emergency services, or creating a new form of system that the world can move freely in. But art plays a very significant role in bringing the change from within, transforming the human being from the inside, affecting human attitude and behavior, creating new habits, and in that way, teaching us to embody a new identity. So these are some of the examples and what I believe is the power of art in bringing transformation. Thank you.
That was excellent, Nana. And just thank you for sharing with us your work, beautiful work amidst a very repressed context. And just very important points that you're bringing around art and artivism and how that strongly helps us advance and amplify alternatives. You powerfully say that art imitates life, right? And art has the ability and that rare avenue to take people, and particularly human beings, where they are not. And so to expand us, to help us reimagine different ways of being, ways of seeing, to reimagine our economies, to imagine our systems of living. And so that's really, really powerful. I think the other thing that I really enjoyed and is so profound for me is when you say that good art is always that which contains a surplus of meaning. And that's the beauty of art, right? And I just, first of all, want to honor that and the work that you've done and just the wisdom that you're bringing to this conversation and the creative ways of looking at alternatives as a lived reality. And so thank you so much, Nana. We'll be back with you in the second round as well. And now I want to move on to my third speaker. This is Dr. Vandana Shiva. Dr. Shiva, you have been celebrated for your many years of research and activism that highlights the negative impacts of globalization, campaigning against genetic engineering, and advocating for the importance of preserving and celebrating biodiversity. What are some of the alternatives that are flourishing in the fight for ecological justice? And what do you feel are the key elements that have made this possible? Welcome, Dr. Shiva.
Yes, it's been a long time, half a century of both activism as well as research in first in physics, but later in interdisciplinary work. And over these years, I have realized, beginning with the beautiful movement called Chipko, where women came out to hug trees, that capitalist patriarchy has multiple diseases. Yeah. First, it's like a cancer. Sadly, it doesn't know when to stop growing. It's never is enough. And the only entity beyond structures of capitalist patriarchy that does this is a cancer cell. Healthy cells grow, maintain themselves, and fade out and are replenished by new cells. And that is true life. The second is it is militaristic. It only knows violence. And I think my fellow panelists have addressed the violence of diverse kinds. And then it has this other disease, a mental disease, which I have named the monoculture of the mind. It cannot see diversity. And if diversity does come up, it has to extinguish it. It has to exterminate it. And the different forms of intolerances are part of this. Now, having done this work for forests and then on the Green Revolution, which is being brought to Africa under the name of the Alliance for the Green Revolution by Bill Gates, who inspired, when the World Social Forum took place in Nairobi, thousands of activists said, we don't need this. Now that's, 15 years ago or when? He doesn't listen. And that's maybe one can just say there's another disease of deafness, not being able to hear and listen. So because of this, I got thrown into a meeting in 1987 where the big poison cartel, the chemical companies, were saying, now we got to own the seed. And I had worked enough with ecology and biodiversity to know that you don't invent a seed. It's not a machine. And they said, by the time we are through, it will be a machine. I said, no, by the time we are through, we will keep seed living. And we will recognize that the evolution of seed is a co-creation by nature and women, because all breeding has been done by women pests. And that's all what began as an alternative is today the respected view. And the idea of intellectual property, the idea of the destroyer and the thief calling themselves the inventor and the creator, at one level, we have exposed that. It's just, they don't give up a bad habit, but it's been exposed. GATT, WTO was about corporations, 5 corporations controlling seed and chemicals, 5 corporations controlling trade, 4 corporations turning good food into junk. And they wrote the trade laws. And because of this meeting in 87, they talked about GATT, how we're going to rule the world through the trade law. When this was released, I read it and I said, oh my gosh, this is exactly what the East India Company wrote when they invaded India under their free trade agreement, Right Honorable East India Company. So I have never seen free trade as anything new. It's a return to old colonialism. It is recolonization. And the alternatives, besides creating seed commons and 150 community seed banks, we've put women at the center of seed expertise. We've put women at the center of the food economy, the true food economy. I say the capitalist patriarchal corporate economy is not a food economy, because producing commodities that are destroying our health, food nourishes the earth, food nourishes our bodies. Anything that's spreading chronic diseases, anything that is destroying the climate, the soils, the water, 75% of the destruction of the planet is because of industrial globalized agriculture. 50% of the greenhouse gases causing climate change is because of industrial globalized agriculture. 75% of chronic diseases because of industrialized globalized agriculture. And what we have managed to do is just show the connections, that the violence to the earth and the violence to our bodies is the same violence. And if we connect all the discussion of today, just as all violence is a continuum, all non-violence is a continuum. And what I feel so joyful about today, after having spent all these years in creating alternatives, but also constantly resisting and saying no. No to the lies, no to the brute force, no to the invasions. You can be very powerful, but the wrong form of power will never dominate over our lives. And so for me, women's energies today is about unleashing the power we have always practiced of power in creative and non-violent form. And the resistances against brute power, dishonest power, violent power, in destructive form. And everywhere you look, whether it's the wars and sites from Afghanistan, or it's the fires, which they call wildfires. They're man-made fires. They are nothing wild about them. When you spray Roundup on a forest, there's nothing wild left in that forest. Or the floods in every country, including mine. All of these are man-made. And when I say man-made, I mean man-made, made by powerful men as a war against the planet, against the earth, and against our bodies. And we are resisting, we are creating alternatives. If it was about honesty, if it was about science, if it was about truth, if it was about life, they've lost. They've already lost. But they put billions and trillions to make trillions and trillions. And we noticed through COVID, the big tech guys walked away with trillions more while people lost their livelihoods. That's what this game is. So today, if globalization of 91 was about 5 corporations trying to control the food system, we now have the big tech giants, the big finance, and the old big ag, big trade, the old colonizers all joining hands to say, we can't let them eat. We can't let them grow food. Got to snatch every morsel from the last child. We've got to snatch peace from the last peaceful community. So that is what we are up against. And I have such faith, trust, and hope that the women's energies will continue life on earth. We will not be defeated.
Dr. Shiva, always such a treat to hear you speak. I think the power, the fire that you speak with, I think, is equated to the work that you're doing for movements and the work that you're doing around ecological justice, social justice, and gender justice. And so more power to you, and we honor that. Amazing, amazing takeaways. Capitalism is like a cancer. It keeps growing, it keeps reinventing itself. And I think that's also why when we talk about alternatives or the idea of capitalism coming to an end, people often find it easier to imagine their own death or the end of, the world, like is and the current conversation on climate change. But apparently it's very difficult for people to imagine the end of capitalism. And so I really resonate with your analysis around this, the idea of having women at the center of the food economies and how industrialized, globalized agriculture is capturing a lot of these systems. But then again, you've had a bit of successes in pushing back on the same. And I think being fueled by the idea that the wrong form of power will never dominate over our lives. And so how can we continue to resist against brute power while flourishing alternatives that are already existing? When you talk about wildfires, I totally agree and even smiled when you said that there's nothing wild about them, right? It's all man-made and the role of man, and it's actually men as a gender grouping, because we know those, when you talk about the 1%, when you talk about the top 8 richest people having cumulative wealth than all the women in Africa, then we can see how this is a man-made problem. But I think that you also inspire us by saying that women's energies, feminist energies, will continue to give life, will continue to nourish life, will continue to sustain us. And so how do we continue to have conversations like this where we encourage each other, but then we also have moments that can encourage us, in our resistance, because the struggle is indeed possible and capitalism will indeed come to an end. Okay, so we're going to move on to the second round of questions. And so, Dr. Vandana, so inspiring work, and I think in feminism we continue to be in our consciousness, we continue to reiterate the importance of intersecting struggles and how we need to reinforce that as we dismantle all systems of oppression. Are there any of the alternatives you've had today, something that you feel could be replicated in your region or your country, and what is your greatest takeaway from this panel?
Well, I think what the panel has reinforced for me is the strength of diversity. A bit like your shirt, your beautiful, colorful shirt. I think all the panelists are defending diversity in one way or the other. And diversity is what is autonomy. Diversity is what is freedom. Because, the capitalist patriarchy sees itself as an hierarchy and then pushes everyone into the uniformity that it desires, and largely it's a uniformity to reduce everyone to raw material for extraction. And if you don't fit, you're a throwaway person. And all the intolerances we see today are intolerances that have been hugely aggravated by the return of colonization. Many of the seeds of this, and I'm sure we went back, the map making by the British Empire is what has created all the conflicts in the Middle East, all, including the Kurdish problem. All map making in Africa, just draw a line. They sit in Europe. The boys sit in Europe and on a piece of paper, just draw a line in the sand. They've destroyed my country by drawing lines and dividing us, India, Pakistan. And then they didn't complete the line through Kashmir. So it continues to be a problem. And I do think the panel today is a beautiful awakening of the other world that's possible. We will not work along lines powerful men draw in ignorance. We will shape bridges and we will celebrate our diversity. And in a diverse world, no being, no insect, no microbe, no person is excluded. Everyone has a place, because a web of diversity means it's a web of diversity. And it's woven by the collaboration, cooperation, synergy between difference. Difference is not a problem. Diversity is not a problem. Capitalist patriarchy has made it a problem. The feminist movement is reclaiming it as the solution. And I think our beautiful panelists have shared that celebration today. And I leave you all with lots of love and lots of solidarity. And as I say, either we'll have a future shaped by women, imagined by women, or humanity will not have a future. The earth will carry on. but other species have gone, and we are being stupid enough, the powerful men are being stupid enough to push our species to extinction, while they think they're pushing other species to extinction, other genders to extinction, other cultures to extinction. They are sowing the seeds of the extinction of the human species. And our struggle is against extinction. Thank you so much.
So powerful, Vandana, Dr. Shiva, and more power to you. I mean, I think there's so much that you've said in terms of building bridges. I think the powerful point, important point on differences, because that's exactly what Nana Akosua is also challenging, right? The differences in gender, differences in sexual orientation. And so thank you so much for your time. Again, more power to you.
Thank you.
And continue the struggle. Let's continue. Thank you. And so over to you, Nana. I think it's been an excellent segue in terms of what Dr. Vandana is saying. What are some of the alternatives, and what is your greatest takeaway from today's panel?
Thank you very much. I feel like so washed in inspiration by everything I just heard. I mean, power to Dr. Shiva, and I definitely agree and re-echo everything she says about diversity is life, right? And bringing this, as you just mentioned, there is this specific fight now to put us in this uniform line of heterosexuality and a Christian form of family, right? Or interpretations of a Christian form of family. Therefore, there is now an anti-LGBT hate bill to try to suppress the diversity of our sexualities, try to erase, bring a genocide in all ways, physically, in the art, on the media, in our homes, even our family members are, by this bill, are mandated to report queer people to police. I mean, it's all sorts of erasure. And just like Dr. Shiva says, this is what patriarchy seeks to draw. These harmful lines of division that do not conform with nature, with diversity. And every species, if there's any lesson nature teaches you, every species, no matter how small they are, even a mosquito is important to the ecosystem. Every species is important to the ecosystem, is life. And diversity is our progression, our continuous evolution. And also there was something I picked out from Dilar, I hope I pronounced that right, where she mentioned about dissociating the revolution from male ideas of revolution. That's definitely something I'm going to take with me. The decolonization of revolution from, this male idea of revolution. And so these are things I'm definitely going to take away in this conversation to inform my own work. I'm already thinking all sorts of stories that will reflect in the art. So thank you very much.
I get both courageous and afraid when an artist starts thinking. So we're really looking forward to your next piece, and really just remember we're always so inspired by the work that you do, always in solidarity. It's difficult times all around, but I think as feminists we always rise, and we want to be in collective solidarity with everything that's happening. So more power to you as well, Akosua. And then Dila, on to you. I think you also really given us a lot to think about in terms of going beyond protests, in terms of, the decolonization and its links to autonomy and really what real freedom is, right? And connecting struggles, something that the Kurdish women's resistance has done so continuously and so intentionally to always try and connect these struggles. And so when you think about the other alternatives you've had, what is the thing that strikes you most, and what is your greatest takeaway from today's session?
Thank you so much, Felajin. It's such an inspiring and powerful event. Thank you so much for bringing us all together. I don't really know where to start because so much beautiful stuff has been said, and I think one of the key things that I'm taking away from this panel, and I hope others will as well, is the importance of connecting struggles as well as connecting issues to each other. Because I think, my fellow panelists have put it so beautifully, and you have said it as well. we live in a connected world where the issues that we're dealing with are no longer separable from each other. We see this in the context of the global pandemic, of course. And at the same time, we see that our alternatives are also being colonized by these institutions that people have long fought against. So I think I want to also say a few cautious things, because I think it's very, because most of the panel, everybody here comes from the context of Asia and Africa. And I think these two continents know the disastrous impact of these women's empowerment NGOs that have come and colonized our imaginations. And I think I don't need to get into that very much, but it's a reality that many feminist projects are now sponsored or microfinanced by states, by the US government, State Department, by corporations like Nike, Google, by the IMF, World Bank, and so on. And even militarist institutions like the NATO are talking about women's empowerment now. So this is something very dangerous, I think, that we should all be aware of, because what does it mean if our feminist activism today is also sponsored by the same institutions that we have collectively fought, because we have been resisting colonization, violence, economic exploitation, environmental destruction, all of the things that everybody here has mentioned. So I think it's really crucial for us to have political perspectives that we develop together. Of course, personal freedoms, individual pleasure, and all of these things are very important, but also we need to realize that a system-funded feminism is not revolutionary. It's just fun, it's nice, it's comfortable, but every time feminist movements make a leap forward, we need to also reassess the grounds on which we operate and say, is my activism, is my movement still antagonistic to the dominant system? Is it still radical, or has it become compatible with the system? Has it in fact become the system's pretty face? So I think this is why, again, defending ourselves from co-optation is very important, which also means defending each other. It really means standing with our sisters now, for example, in Afghanistan. It's really important for us to follow what is happening there, because we as women, as feminists, we cannot play by the playbook of this binary, militaristic, exploitative system of state and capitalism. So I think that's why it's so great to see also AVID make this effort to connect our struggles with each other. I think we need to create more of such platforms to really learn from each other and see how can we defend life. So in that sense, I'm very hopeful to hear from everybody and to see that we are all developing these new ideas about leadership, about expanding our artistic imaginaries to really connect our individual liberation to the liberation of our own societies, but also to the world, and how that's so connected to the protection of the planet and saving the planet also from extinction. So in that sense, I think my greatest takeaway here is that we all have great ideas. We have very good alternatives. We have the will to resist, but it's really important to connect these struggles and to not stand in solidarity with each other anymore, but to really create new platforms of common struggle, of new internationalisms, to say your struggle is my struggle, and I will reject and refuse those that want to fragment these struggles. And I think we need to watch out for state agendas, militaristic institutions, global monetary, all of these institutions that are now taking feminism away from us. I think we need to make sure feminism is a threat to the system. And because of that, I think just the last thing I want to say is that it's important to then resist this like neoliberal feminism, which is totally compatible with state and capitalism. But that's why also, in order for these alternatives to develop, they need to also live, which means we need to live, which is why I think one of the priorities of the feminist struggle today must be resisting militarism and resisting the arms trade and resisting the wars that are led on our behalves. Thank you.
What a fantastic, heartwarming, my heart is so full, energizing, resistance conversation. I think I ran out of English words. If I was speaking in my native language, perhaps I would have gone on and on, but I ran out of English words to just express, the fire that you have put in this moment, your wisdom, your energy, who you are and what you do and who you represent, because we all know that we are part of communities, and you are really being able to articulate what we are able to do as feminists across the world. And so we really just want to appreciate you for this fantastic conversation. One of the things that, I think is cross-cutting from all the panelists is the idea that we need to continue to build bridges and celebrate our diversity. And I think Dilar even challenges us and says that perhaps in moments like this, when we see what's happening in Afghanistan, when you see what's happening in Palestine, when you see what's happening in the Pacific with the islands, climate change and the global north, perhaps it's not enough to be in solidarity, but we need to build new platforms of common struggles. And I think that's very, very powerful and essential. The need for collaboration, cooperation and synergy across feminist movements. The need for feminists to reclaim the web of diversity as the solution. I think that was advanced by Dr. Shiva. And we can see that across board, whether it's diversity of gender identities or sexual orientation, whether it's diversity when you look at biodiversity and seed and food sovereignty. And so we need to reclaim that as the web of, as the solution, right? The alternatives that we are advancing. And we have alternatives in plural, not just one alternative. And so wrapping that up and saying that, our struggle is against extinction. We are trying to center people and planet, and not just the extinction or the end of the world as we know it, but the extinction of what humanity looks like, the extinction of what justice looks like, the extinction of what people's movement and people's solidarity, collective solidarity would look like. And so thank you so much for all this. I mean, I don't even think I've done a very good job in summarizing it because it was so rich. But all I just want to say is that we honor you, we honor the work that you do, and we remain in solidarity across with all the struggles across the world. A luta continua. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. We had such a fantastic and powerful panel this Friday. My name is Felogin again, Felogin Anumo with AWID, the Association for Women's Rights and Development. And we wanted to follow up with some of the questions that we have gotten. But before we get into the questions, just to thank and honor and acknowledge Maria, who is with us today and had that powerful artistic contribution. And thank you, Maria, for doing that. So I think, unfortunately, because of the Global South challenges, we're not able to have Nana join in for the questions, as well as Dr. Shiva, but they are, we are thankful that they were able to make their comments. And of course, doubly thankful now to Dilar, who has been able to just join us. And of course, speak to, in addition to your powerful remarks, which are very, very moving, very, very useful, to just answer the questions that you've gotten. And then obviously this will be up in all our platforms, and Dilar, fortunately, is also available on social media, and is also having a book that's going to be published and launched on the Kurdish women's resistance. And so, Dilar, I think the first question that I'd like to address to you is around what you had seeded towards the end of your remarks around the idea that radical liberal feminism from the global north is undermining what you do. I think that's how it's been phrased, but I want you to just put it in context in terms of what you meant and then advance that idea.
Sure. Thank you so much, Felogin. It's an honor to be here, and thanks everybody for coming, for listening, and for having questions and continuing the discussion. It's sad, of course, that the other panelists cannot be here, but I hope we can still continue the conversation. To address the question, I think this is not something entirely new. This is something that feminist women, or generally people in the global south who are engaged in different struggles for the environment, for women's liberation, for all kinds of rights, basically have been criticizing for decades now, that there has been this Western-led and quite colonial NGOization of resistance, as Arundhati Roy, I think about 16 years or so, once called it in an event. And what is meant by this is that the kind of feminism, the kind of women's rights activism, or all of these women's empowerment schemes that I was also mentioning earlier, they are a version of a very watered down and very basic language that is actually so much less radical than all of the struggles that have been waged in the global South against colonialism, against imperialism, capitalism, in the past as well as today, and probably also in the future. But they have money, they have funding. So what happens is that they enter these countries, and often they come with government agendas, although they are called non-governmental organizations, but they often serve the policies of states in the global North, especially the US, Canada, European countries, basically, especially in the context of Europe, there's always a very colonial dynamic as well. And what ends up happening is that they come and pick very active people who are genuinely caring about their communities. They genuinely want progress and change and development for their communities, but they basically get co-opted into these institutions that also come with very liberal ideologies that are highly individualistic, that often uproot people from their regional context and then celebrate individual women as an example, as an inspiration of something. So we see this a lot with brown and Black women being individually taken out of their struggle context and then basically offered for consumption as a source of inspiration for other places. But often they lose touch with their communities and their struggles along the way. So this kind of elite formation, but generally also this colonization of civil society and democracy struggles in the global South by these organizations, I think one needs to be very wary of the colonial and imperial dynamics that come with them. Not only is this a loss of energy, it is also very sinister, I would say, because oftentimes we are very oblivious to the ways in which they are tied to state and corporate agendas as well. So what I'm trying to say is that these women's empowerment projects, I'm not trying to lump them all into one category. Of course, there are some that do very good and important work, but the vast amount of them and the fact that they are hegemonic takes a lot away from very radical and revolutionary solutions that people in the region often have that are much more in line with their community's needs, as opposed to these standardized and top-down imposed projects that come out of nowhere and that are basically the brainchildren of people who are located somewhere in the global North and who have absolutely no sense of what is actually needed in any given context. This high modernist way of thinking that we have created all of these problems, now we will offer the solutions. I don't think it will work like that. These colonial solutions cannot solve the problems created by colonialism. So in that sense, that's basically what I was trying to get at when I was trying to criticize it. But this is not my criticism. This is something that for decades activists in the global South have been saying. But I do think that things are getting more serious now, and it is important to be mindful of the meaning of this also for the social fabric of these of our struggles in our community.
100%, and I totally agree with you, Dilar. And I think you're also having this conversation on a day when we have seen the Global Citizen, I think, try to launch a talk show around activisms advancing ideas that they can fund. And so it was so perverse that even, to think that activism is something that can become consumptionist in the sense of a reality TV is really what somebody has defined in the social media as a late stage capitalism. How does capitalism also look at remaining relevant? And I think it's exactly what you say, by co-opting alternatives and then depoliticizing them so that their intended political intent is not going to be realized, but they have adopted the language. And I think it's definitely something we need to be wary of. Thank you for raising that. Now, unfortunately, because you are only panelist, I will raise all the questions to you. And I think you're more than capable of, just speaking to them.
I'm also more than happy for other people to pitch in and share their views. Of course, I don't want to take up all the space.
For sure. So what I'll do is I'll definitely, and what we can do with that, I think, because it's a recurring question, is share the resources, because like you rightfully say, it's a body of work analysis around, what does transnational solidarity look like, and some of the critiques around transnational feminisms, as it were. So we'll take that forward as AWID. There's a question that's related to that, and I think is important that I can raise to you, is what we are seeing with young feminists, especially how the question has been framed, that women are in the front lines of the struggle for territories, generating autonomy outside governments and transnational power structures. Young feminists are questioning everything and banning everything, changing an entire logic of consumption and well-being. Do you see it that way?
I hope I understood the question correctly, but I do think, we talked a lot in this panel about diversity as well, and I think this also applies to the idea of the youth. Like, for example, in the Kurdish freedom movement context, actually, the youth movement is also organized autonomously, parallel to the women's autonomous movement that we have. So the youth and the women are basically seen as the two pioneers, the ones that need to bring the general movement, basically the world of the people who are more closer to the system, which are basically men and older people, tend to be more conservative, more invested in maintaining things as they are. So these two are forces, the women and the youth, that are organized autonomously inside our movement. So what does that mean? It means there are certain decisions, for example, about the nature of a protest against something that are taken only in the youth assemblies, which are also, as I was trying to explain in a rather clumsy way earlier on, in a confederal manner. So we have these youth, locally organized youth movements. So, however, when you bring those two things together, young women are, in our view, the most radical, the most internationalist oriented, the ones that they have the most revolutionary potential within them. If this is often how we phrase it. And why is that? Is because oftentimes they seek to divorce from the dominant system, because it is only designed to put them in shackles, to oppress them, especially in our conservative society. For example, young women's lives are often very miserable. There's all sorts of violence and oppression against women in our community, which is why we say the young women actually need to be the vanguards of the change. They embody within them the possibility of alternative. And that's because they have it's not an essentialistic thing. It's more of a philosophical category, if you will, the young women. And that, of course, includes all kinds of different identities as well. So the spirit of young women actually is also something that we encourage men, for example, to get inspired by. How revolutionary are you, and to what extent are you willing to sacrifice your privileges in order to make a different world possible? So in that sense, I think, just because the question also mentioned things around breaking with the past, I do think there are a lot of burning the bridges, or some languages have different expressions for these kinds of things, to kind of break with the systems of oppression. But at the same time, I think young women's revolutionary potential is not just about breaking with existing systems, but also to build on what is good about society. So the solidarity and care relations that we have, and oftentimes, of course, feminists speak about social reproduction, of course, as well, inside our movements, inside our families, and elsewhere. So it's also about how to rewild and reroute these cells of society and community and care, if you will, and how we as young women, for example, can also embody that. So in that sense, I think there's a dual character. On one hand, the young woman identity, if you will, just again, I'm not trying to impose essentialistic categories here, but the young women as an identity, if you will, as a phenomenon in history, are the ones that want to break with systems of oppression. They have insights into this kind of world that could be. They have ideas and they have the energy as well, and they have so much, they have worlds to win in that sense. So I think paying attention to the alternatives that are proposed and actually lived already, the kind of friendships that exist among young women, for example, to protect each other also inside of their own very intimate context, is something very interesting. The militant aspect, but also the very beautiful life-defending characteristics that these things often embody. So I think it's not something that you don't have to be young and a woman to have this kind of spirit. I think one needs to look at the young woman spirit as the radicalizing force of everyone. It's a struggle against your peers who are also young and who also want change. So it's against the patriarchy of young men and other people as well. But on the other hand, it's also against this proneness that people have towards becoming more and more conservative as they age, because they seek comfort and stability. And in a world in which these things are not taken for granted, I think it is very important to pay attention to how young women across different contexts are driving struggles with their imaginations. I think imagination is one of the most powerful things that we see from young women from around the world.
So beautifully put. And I think for me, the young feminists, young people have worlds to win is such a beautiful metaphor. And I can't even say it any differently. And just thank you for that insight. And of course, I see a lot of our young feminists on the call who would be able to nourish that and build on those ideas and reach out to you as well in terms of the organizing of the Kurdish Women's Resistance. So thank you. And so just to raise to you the last question, and then we can wrap it up, is one that is around almost building off your previous response. And the question is, how do you think our feminist movements could remain autonomous while we also need economic resources to live? So we are in need of those funds. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for all the questions. I think of course it depends on the context, but I think trying one's best to be as self-sufficient and sustainable as possible is very important. But of course, movements need resources to continue and to really sustain the work that they're trying to do, and especially in some contexts when it's about the need for large-scale infrastructure or other things, seeking different ways of funding one's initiatives is very important. And in the context of the Kurdish freedom movement, much of it is actually what we call people-funded. So basically the funding, I can say the Kurdish women's movement does not receive any funding from anyone. There are small projects, for example, in northern Syria that are funded by usually left-leaning organizations that have funded schools, or some fundraising projects by activists that have opened orphanages and these kinds of things. But in terms of large-scale sums, there are none. So I think it is, on one hand, important to be mindful of how resources, and I know there's a lot of discussion among feminist movements about how to organize budgets, how to be fair, how to undo hierarchies and how these things are distributed. But also I think one needs to morally also protect oneself from thinking about activism as a form of salary and income generating kind of economy. Again, this leads us back to the previous discussion and points about how you can be co-opted if you're not ideologically, politically mindful of who actually gives you the money. You will not be aware of how they want you to spend that money, for what purposes, what's the longer term strategic aim that different institutions have when they give you a certain amount of money. So it's not to say one should not accept any money from anyone, but there needs to be collective political and probably ideological assessments of what is happening, why are we being funded, why are people approaching us. So it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but I think in many ways, funding is what corrupts individuals. It's what corrupts or kind of breaks down and breaks up organizations. So it's a very sensitive topic. And I think, I don't have a blanket answer, of course, because each context is different, each project, each initiative requires different resources. But what I just want to say is that one needs to be just very mindful and very transparent and very, very protective of one's identity and one's community when one accepts funding from somewhere. So I don't have a general answer. I don't think there's a principle by which one can operate when it comes to this topic. But it is possible to generate sustainable economies, I think, within movements that are based on gifts, on sharing, on solidarity. For example, whenever somebody in our community passes away, the entire community, this is why we have these people's assemblies, for example, at the very local level, is that everybody tries their best to sustain this family and their needs in this point in time, or whenever there's a larger campaign. So it's usually we try to see who can contribute what in what way. But money is, of course, always a very sensitive topic. And I think it's something that movements and struggles always have to figure out, given the context in which they operate. But it's very, very hard, I think, to reject funding. And probably most people simply cannot do it. But that's why a political analysis and understanding and alternative feminist infrastructures also are very important, so that if an organization needs money, they should be able to access it not from corrupt and exploitative and extremely dangerous organizations and states that have their own agendas.
So beautifully put, Dilar. And I think, as you say, it's a sensitive topic, but one that, we must confront, as a lot of things are, in terms of what is always at stake in terms of resources and power. And I think one of the terms that I recently came across and really gave me language into what I think about this issue, and also I hear you saying, is charismatic violence, often that comes in the form of funds, but we know that the violence it does in terms of breaking down organizing, in terms of breaking down our focus, our purpose, our vision is very real and very alive. And I think we have very many examples. But I do think you say something very important. And I think the most important thing that you say is that it's possible. The alternative is possible, because I think that's often where we don't have, or people do not go, right? But I think what you're saying is that it's possible within our resistance, within the front, we have been able to do it. And I think that is so inspiring. So we really just want to thank you. I never get to hear enough from you, but thank you for condensing, so much information, addressing all the questions. We thank you so much for taking the time. We honor you, we honor your work. We can't wait to read your book and distribute it, because I think it's going to be so useful, in this in our conversations around alternatives and making them possible. And thanking all the participants. You've been an excellent audience. And please continue to engage with the rest of the Feminist Festival. Have a good evening, a good night, good morning.
Thank you so much, Philogene, and everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you, María Bonita, as well. I think you're still with us. Thank you for your art piece. Thank you, everyone.